Welcome into our Hear Me, See Me podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. Hear Me, See Me is a mental health awareness initiative of WIBW TV. And as you've been seeing on the podcast throughout this year, we've been having a lot of deep and heavy conversations, people sharing their personal stories. And those are so very important for all of us to know that we're not alone. But today we kind of get a little more helpful. You know, what do we do when we're having those feelings? Ariel Ludwig is the outpatient services manager at Valeo Behavioral Health in Topeka. Welcome to you. So glad you could join us.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure.
This is a great, timely episode because we're going to be dropping it as we are heading into the holiday season and talk about a minefield to navigate over the holidays and things that might be coming up. Gosh, where do we start this conversation, right? What is it about the holidays that can bring up feelings? We're supposed to be happy. It's like the Hallmark Channel movie season.
Well, I think time is everything. It's an annual event. Thanksgiving, Christmas are backed up right after one another. I think people have expectations of what their holidays should look like, but they also have a memory of what it looked like. And sometimes our expectations haven't met our memory, and they are too unrealistic, or we try too hard to perform in those holidays. Yes, everybody wants it to be joyous, but there's always a point of agitation when it comes to doing something right. And with holidays, we put a lot of effort into making sure that everyone else is happy, including ourselves. And sometimes ourselves take the back burner. I don't know about you, but my mother was the mother that always was working all day long, and then we'd ask her to sit down, and she's like, "I'm too busy." It was for us. And that's a good memory for us, but maybe not for her. And so we have these expectations that we want everybody to be happy, and we put that on ourselves. But there are times where we're just not always going to perform at our best, and things may not go as well as we planned. And I think that creates a little bit of stress on people.
Oh, and the stress comes in on the front end. And there's so many directions that you can go, even with just this portion of the conversation, the expectations that we put on ourselves. So how can we, first of all, if we keep putting the pressure on ourselves to meet those expectations, what can happen to us?
Yeah, stress is interesting. Just kind of a little bit of like brevity to like what stress really is. Stress is the body's fight or flight response in agitation, and short-term stress is actually okay for us. Short-term stress is it increases adrenaline, it increases what we call noradrenaline, which is norepinephrine. And it makes us perform faster. And in some ways, it actually helps our immune systems. So short-term stress in the moment, if it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon and all the food isn't ready on the table yet and you got to get it done by 5, sometimes that's okay. What happens later is the kind of this midterm stress when we fail to modulate the stress that has lasted longer than that moment. And then that moment, if we can't modulate it, we tax ourselves. And that too can take a toll on our bodies. And we get kind of used to that. And people who are stressed tend to not really realize that they are stressed. And they just kind of continue, and that creates that chronic stress that we're talking about. So you and I were talking earlier, the thing that I always wish people to do is be aware. You have to really take a moment to assess how you feel. Emotional temperature, like you got to put a gauge on it. If I'm talking to somebody that has a lot of stress, it sounds cliche to say, "Hey, tell me from 1 to 10, how do you feel?" 1 being the worst in the stress and 10 being the highest. And they're like, "Well, how's that going to help me?" Well, anything that's subjective, if you do it over and over and over again and you get better at tracking how that feels, it becomes objective. So as we listen to our bodies and we say, "I'm feeling like a 7 right now," and you really think about what does that feel like in the body. People kind of analyze themselves, do those body scans, they take a deep breath and they ask themselves like, "Yeah, this, I have tightness in my chest, heart is racing, my body is sore, and I just feel frantic." So, at that time, if you feel that is right to how you feel and you honor that, you can try to digress and relax and engage in some kind of relaxation technique, and you do it again. It's a process. It's never going to be perfection. It's a process. And so you get better at that, and then soon enough, you know what a 7 feels like, and you know when to stop.
That's what I was going to ask you, is how do you know what a 7 feels like? Well, how do we take that body temperature? So I'm thinking about holiday season. We've got the list of people that maybe we want to shop for, but then we know that money's tight, so how are we going to shop for them? Oh, they want me to host the meal? Sure, I can host the meal. Okay, how do I clean my house when I've got, the cat and the dog and the kids, and now some of them want to stay here, and it builds. And if we don't think it's stressing us out, if we think we can handle it, how can we take the body temperature to know, okay, maybe I'm not? What are we going to maybe be seeing in ourselves or how we're interacting with other people?
Yeah, so, somebody who has an increased stress, there are people that do engage in stress inoculation so that they're actually able to stress them out. They can handle stress better than some, but the people that may not be able to recalibrate, let's say, their stress, they're going to feel a lot of franticness, the feeling of overwhelm, that overwhelming feeling of taking on too much is a feeling that I too myself have gotten caught up into. We may value achievement, but that achievement might make us say yes too much, and saying yes all the time drives that adrenaline. So we're going to feel a lot of tightness. We're going to feel like we're alone. Oftentimes when you're stressed out or in a situation, the clarity of mind doesn't really work. You kind of go, and you're going to wear yourself out. And you may not know it until afterwards, but if you can catch it before, just the high energy levels, the heated body, body temperature is a big thing, and heart racing, and sometimes having someone else, asking them how they see you is helpful as well. Having others around, although asking for help is a whole nother issue. Like, how do you ask for help when you accepted everything?
You might see yourself getting short-tempered with people,
yes.
But then you actually also have those physical symptoms? Yes,
the physical symptoms. Irritability is very major. When the old saying, like, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. That saying comes from this idea that when you don't get enough sleep, you don't reset your clock. And so you wake up, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with cortisol, but your cortisol levels are the levels that wake you up. Your cortisol and your blood sugar levels actually are the highest peak in the morning. And so if you don't get good night's sleep, you don't actually reset those, so you wake up kind of charged. And so if you can think back of a time when you were irritable, it's not unlikely to think that your cortisol levels and your stress levels were too high at that moment, and every little thing can be the worst thing that ever happened. I'll give you, for instance, yesterday I couldn't log into my computer. I thought my world was crashing.
Yes, of course.
I was like, oh my gosh, but that's not a big deal. I had to take a step back, paused, took a break, took a deep breath, and asked myself, is this really a big deal? And it wasn't.
How do you do that? So that's one piece of advice, how to keep the stress at bay, because this is all about how do we make ourselves handle all of this a little bit better. And it is, you're right, overwhelming in the moment. But what else can we do? Taking a deep breath, stepping back, that's a good one.
Yep. I love the Sigh. I don't know if you ever heard of this, the therapeutic Sigh. It's one of the best things that you can do for yourself. One thing that you can do is, when we inhale more, we take in more oxygen, so our heart rates actually speed up, which is not a bad thing. But if we inhale strongly, and sometimes twice, so for instance, like if you inhale twice, and you hold that for a minute, you get all that oxygen into your lungs, and the alveoli collect all that carbon that's stored there, because that's what gets stored, and you just do a deep sigh out. And you just go, however you may do it, a big sigh. We all sigh. And what's happening is you increase your adrenaline, and then your brain is told to decrease it when you take in that oxygen. So the exhale helps. And I think the deep sigh is one of the best things. Just mimic how you would if you were sighing. Just big, deep breath.
It's all
you do
okay.
If you do it 3 or 4 times, you might even feel a little tired. That's a good thing. That means your parasympathetic, your common system's working. And so I always advise that one. It's a very easy trick.
You know how I notice I'm getting overwhelmed or stressed out or doing too much? And my husband's actually the one who pointed it out. He's like, you're forgetting things.
Oh, gosh.
It's like, and we have this like, my brain is full. I've reached capacity.
Yep.
There's no more left there. So I make lists.
Yeah.
People laugh. I've got little notes all over, but I make lists.
Yeah. Lists are great. And you're totally right. Yeah, I didn't even touch on that, and that's a great point. When you get all that information, things are happening, you're so focused that you actually can't really do much else than what you're focusing on. So it's not uncommon. I mean, I'm guilty of this. If I'm having a busy, rushed morning, I lose my keys.
Yeah.
I lose my phone. And then I'm looking for my phone, then I just lost again. And I'm like, wait, what just happened? The other day I had my glasses on top of my head and I was looking for those. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting how easy it is when you get so focused and narrow-minded that you can't actually see outside of that. And so lists are wonderful. Lists function as a way of being able to think, write, and reinterpret. And a lot of times, I don't know about you, but perhaps when I write lists, and this might happen for you as well, you write the list and you don't need to write it again. It just helps you retain it. And it has this kind of peace keep too, like a completion. It makes you feel like you won't forget it now.
And it makes you feel like, oh, I got this done.
Oh, that
or
that
you see this
accomplishment.
super long list and you're like, okay, something's got to give. I'm not going to do any more. All of this is fantastic because I think it gets to the point of why we're addressing this topic. This is stuff that makes our mental health take a beating. And I think a lot of the conversations that we've had here is people have shared some very heavy personal stories that did delve into a diagnosis of actual mental illness, that we really are talking about mental health overall and keeping things from getting to the point where we now have entered the realm of an actual mental illness. Mental health overall is important. And I think it's important for people to realize that the difference, that having a mental health struggle doesn't mean there's this huge mental illness.
Right.
It's part of us, our brains and our bodies.
Yeah, mental health, everybody has some level of condition where they can be bothered by stressors and outside forces. Chemicals are calibrated, recalibrated. They're not, you may not know you're struggling. Someone say you might be struggling. Depression is a real thing. Anxiety is a real thing, and they do kind of go back and forth a lot. Mental illness isn't a stigma anymore. Mental illness is just who we are as people. And the one thing that we have to understand about mental illness is there is treatment, there is care, there is approaches. But if you don't become aware of it, and I think, again, you and I were talking about this, if you can't see it, then it may have been suppressed, where you've kind of pushed it away and gotten used to that. I mean, we meet people all the time that are angry, but they don't know they're angry. They're walking around angry. They're walking around agitated. Their blood pressure is high, but they don't want to see the blood pressure. Or they repress it. And when you talk about repressing, it's usually like, well, I'll go work 50 hours a week so I don't have to be home and deal with the stress of life. So then they overcompensate. Mental health doesn't have to be a stigma. And I'm seeing that kind of change. And I mean, again, probably not the best way to say it, but since COVID, right, we've seen a big change in initiative that people are actually struggling, and they've been struggling for years. And because we accept mental health for what it is now, people are okay getting treatment. And we have to be okay with that idea that maybe we are needed to be vulnerable, because if you're vulnerable, you can allow help. And asking for help is hard. I mean, I don't like doing it, but I do it for practice, even.
Well, and even asking for help is just like seeing a doctor once a year for a physical.
Right. That's true. Knowing so I will say this, like one of the biggest things that I ever did for myself was, 5 years ago, I was having trouble sleeping and I had a lot of pain. Just, I could have ignored that. I had a very nice a bond with my doctor, but I got a blood panel checked and I had low vitamin D levels. Small little things like that have been life-changing because it improves my well-being and it's improved my relationship with that doctor. And when we talk about mental health, sometimes the most important thing is relationship that you have with someone. You have to form that relationship. Trust is important. but also just being able to converse with somebody about how you feel, and they hear you and validate you.
We've talked about stress and anxiety over the holidays, and I want to get into the sadness and depression and grief and those things. But first, I found it very interesting. How did you get started and interested in becoming a mental health professional?
Well, that was, so I've always had my own struggles with depression. I dealt with it as a small child, 12 years old, kind of isolated, just didn't really fit in, and I felt that. And then I got into I was saying earlier, I was dabbling in the fixing things. I was always trying to build stuff and take things apart, wasn't really putting it back together again. But then as I kind of found myself in high school, I started thinking about, how does all this work? Because I ran a lot in high school. I ran cross-country track, and I'd run and I'd be like, why do I feel better? Why do I feel better now when I didn't feel better before I jogged? It got me really interested in like how these chemicals work, and I started studying and I started like looking into it. Like, there has to be a reason for me to feel better, and so it was natural for me to go into psychology. It was natural for me to go into social work, and then just kind of learn anything I could after that. And anything I learned, I always had this backing in my head. I said, how does this apply to me, and how does this work? So then I could take it apart now without feeling
You're not
like
physically taking apart somebody's brain, but you kind of are.
I don't think I'd be a neurosurgeon because I might not put their stuff back together again, but I do think I can learn about it and know how this works and feel more confident and aware of how a change can happen. I don't think there's a fix to mental health, but I think like there is resolution to mental health where you can find peace within it. And anything you do, you can find peace, I think.
The knowledge and understanding. So as you explained the knowledge and understanding of anxiety and stress, I can understand how that then could lead into depression. If we feel we are not meeting the expectations that we've placed on ourselves, or that we feel like others have placed on us, we can get upset with ourselves and sad and feel like we're not pleasing anyone.
That is very true. Yeah, depression's a very scary thing for many people. And I think depression's very scary because when somebody is overly depressed, they may not ask for help. And when I kind of think of depression, stress on the body, tiredness, fatigue, not feeling satisfied in life, feeling not accomplished, just not being able to feel well about yourself. And it goes to the gamut of everything, sleep, exercise, diet, all that stuff. Anything you learned in health class, it all takes a hit. And so as one falls further in depression, it becomes kind of like a self-preservation, really, of the body. The body doesn't really want to do anything, and you become inactive because the body doesn't have anything to give, and you don't feel like it does. And so that sedentary nature is very scary. And so knowing what depression symptoms are, asking for help, even though you don't feel like you have the energy for help, is one of the best things you do for yourself.
What are those symptoms, and how do we know when we need to ask for help when it comes to that, especially as it relates specifically to the stress and expectation level of the holidays? We're not living up to the expectations or our memories that we've set.
Right. Yeah. Holidays, to be honest with you, some people have these seasonal affective issues. And seasonal affective, I just want to touch on that. Seasonal affective disorder is typically relatable in scientific terms to the sun going down earlier and not having as much sunlight. And vitamin D is being important for the absorption of sunlight. Through the absorption of sunlight and your diet, a lot of times people just are not as active, so you don't have as much adrenaline or energy, so you don't get as much pleasure out of life. People can have seasonal affective disorder, but they also can have, like I said earlier, as I mentioned, if they had a really bad childhood experience with holidays, they might not know it, but as that approaches, they might be feeling that depression again because it's not a pleasurable time for them. And that can be a struggle as well because, our minds remember every day. And if it's an anniversary of something, we definitely remember. So that's a general sense of it's just problematic for some in general. But overall, if somebody is starting to feel a lot of pressure and tiredness, they just feel run down, and the symptomology is really just, they could have a lot of anxiety at first. They could, depression doesn't always show the same way. Somebody could be agitated. Somebody could be, anxious. Somebody could be, even obsessive. But traditionally speaking, most people who get depressed start to find that their adult living activities are struggling. Your ADLs, they're not doing the things they're supposed to be doing. They're not showing up to work. They're canceling things. They're isolating. Those are kind of the social things. Physically, just tired, tired all the time, not eating well or eating too much even. And those can be also physical symptoms. If you can't smile, that's a big issue. The capacity to laugh, kind of just complete avoidance of conversation at times happens. It's a struggle.
So that's when we take the big sigh or make a list. If we realize it in ourselves, if we see this in a loved one, what should we do?
Yeah, I think we have to ask the loved one how they're doing. The loved one, if we see it, they might be resistant to change. I find it hard sometimes to let somebody know that I think they're depressed. I usually ask them, hey, how are you feeling? More of an open-ended question. And if they don't want to tell you, I would continue to ask in a manner where it's open-ended and supportive. Hey, notice that you might need some help with this. How you doing? Stuff like that.
Should we be specific? I think that's the thing. I mean, if you're going to say how you're doing, be ready to hear the answer.
Right.
If you're going to offer to help, be ready to help.
Right.
Most of us, I think, have that response, that automatic response, like, no, it's fine. You don't need to do anything.
Yes, that's
so
right.
Do we then come with something more specific, like, hey, I noticed you're offering to make the whole Christmas dinner. How about I go do the grocery shopping? Or how about I make this for you? Or how about, do you need let's go together and do our shopping for the gifts for the kids?
That would be best. Yes, I think offering help in a supportive manner is always best. I notice that you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or I'm noticing that you might be a little overwhelmed. I've done this before. I can help you. If they say no, sometimes the best thing to do is to go back and say, could we do this together? Because that is a collaborative experience, and collaboration with somebody who's resistant seems a little bit easier than doing it for them. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a good strategy. The focus has to be there. A lot of times motivational interviewing is a thing that we want to try to do. We want to empower the other the person that we're speaking to take control of what they want us to do. And you have to kind of be ready to have, like, oh yeah, you need to go to the store for me, so don't just offer help if you're not going to do it, right? Mm-hmm. But also just like the empowerment goes with the collaboration and focus but the resistance that person has, if you allow them to kind of divulge why they don't want you to help, why don't you want me to help today? They might start talking a little bit more, and they might actually tell you more than you'd planned them to tell you, and they might actually in the end feel like you want to help them, because if you listen and you ask and you're present and available, I think people ultimately get to talk, feel, and adjust, and so they might ask to help.
How do we deal with the grief and loss over the holidays? Because when you talk about expectations and memories and living up to them, I think sometimes that's tied very closely to perhaps a loved one, whether regardless of what time of year that loved one has passed away. But for example, in my own life, my father passed away shortly before Christmas. Yeah. And not only that, but my father, he was in a barbershop chorus, and every year they had a Christmas show, and he played Santa. So what is surrounding you at Christmas time, right? And so for me, Christmas now will forever be tied to, yes, we had my dad's funeral a week before Christmas, and he was our Santa, and he's not here anymore. Yeah. And I think people, everybody has similar stories and experiences. Sure. We always did Christmas, and mom always planned it, and now mom isn't here. Now what do we do? Yeah. First, I guess, is awareness.
Yes,
being aware that
Yep.
these traditions and memories exist.
Exactly.
We can't stop those, I guess.
We really can't. Grief is something we all face in life. We take it different ways. I typically, when I speak to somebody with grief issues, it's going to be now people could not feel it at all the first year it happens. Some people might feel it the next year. It may be just something they push aside. Again, that is a challenge. when we experience emotions, the thing that I usually suggest is that if it's happened naturally, we should honor it. Nobody wants to cry. Nobody wants to be sad, right? No, we don't feel like we need to. I don't know how many people we experience in this world that say when they start tearing up, they say they're sorry. To me, that is something I learned, that it's okay to cry. And we shouldn't say sorry, because when you cry for something, you couple that emotion, and now crying becomes part of your sadness. If we don't cry, we ignore how we really feel. And then what happens is we suppress, and then we will feel a different way. We might get angry, which isn't what we feel at all. So I think experiencing your emotions the way they are, if it's too overwhelming, that's when you need help, because it's good to have someone to talk to and validate, because it makes you feel better and you get it out. But as we experience our emotions, we want to desensitize from the intensity of them. They never go away. And as they shouldn't. You shouldn't not be sad about losing somebody. I think people might be afraid that if they might, but that's not the way it works. You can be sad, but still honor that, but also be able to have some joy in life. So that really is important. And holidays are tough.
How can we move past that? How do we honor a person but still move forward
Right.
without the knee-jerk reaction being, well, since that was something we did with Mom, I don't want to touch it anymore?
Right.
Is it about finding new ways, incorporating new traditions?
Yeah.
Or, well, I guess, start with that.
No, I think that's really important. If you can accept something, you can say that, this happened and I'm not okay with it, but I can find joy in my life. You can start to reassociate things. If somebody passes, memorials. Every year, celebrate their life. Celebrate their life. Spend time. It's going to be a sad moment to go to someone's grave, but celebrate their life. Talk about the good times. Get a group of people together. Change that memory around as more positive rather than negative. I always find that to be helpful. Write letters, stuff like that, but honor that moment in time that you feel sad and try to reassociate. If you lose someone, it's always important to make sure that you always have one positive thing at least that you can think about that gives you a little bit of joy, because they've lived their whole life. Or it could be a pet, and I had recently just lost a pet, and it's hard.
Yes, it is.
It's hard, and I'm talking about it right now. It may not be the best time to talk about it, but I don't think I'm going to tear up, but I have been. But it's the thing, I need to remember that up to that moment of the passing, the rest was good. And that's what you have to understand. You can still have that moment. Just because it's the last thing doesn't mean it's the most impactful thing. Everything before was also very important.
And it's okay to be sad?
It is very much okay to be sad.
And we don't have to go to all the parties?
We don't. We have to just...
How do you set limits? Because I think setting limits is part of it.
Sometimes you feel like you have to... Now, if you grew up in a split household, and I didn't, but I'm just saying I hear this all the time, it's hard to set boundaries.
Yeah.
You don't have to do everything. You have to know your limits. There are going to be people that are disappointed when you say, I can't do that. But you can try to negotiate. I always think negotiating. Okay, I can't come over that day for Christmas. Can I come over, Christmas Eve? Sometimes that works okay. You might have people that don't like that, but people will be disappointed. You have to think about your own welfare. And it's okay for that. And it's okay to set those boundaries. And another thing I always like to do is called an exit strategy.
This isn't like when you're on a bad date and you have somebody call you so that
That's an exit strategy. That's exactly right.
The Christmas exit strategy from Ariel.
Yeah, so, there's football on Christmas, and stuff like that. So it's or Thanksgiving, and you're like, well, I'm going to stay until the end of the game. Tell them right when you get there. Because if you do stay to the end of the game, they'll know you're leaving. But also, if you stay longer, they're like, wow, how awesome for them staying longer. So there's always the exit strategy where you kind of set that precursor based on something that's happening.
I think we always feel like that makes us a jerk.
If you get used to it, you feel it.
It's about taking care of ourselves and sometimes protecting ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, because you can't always feel your best. I think a lot of people, dread. It's hard to go to everything, and You may not even want to be there. And you're not sure how you're going to feel. I just like setting that boundary because it gives me the option, because I may not feel my best. You know, last Christmas I was sick. You know, I was recovering from a sickness, and, you know, 4 hours later, it's hard. And I should have said, hey, I'm not feeling my best. Of course, I didn't tell anybody. So don't do that, by the way. If you're not feeling your best, let people know. Don't hold it in. But yeah, it was exhausting. And the next day I was sick again. I just wore my body out, you know, and that's what stress does to the body. You need rest. You need to be okay. You're going to miss out on times, you know, and that's okay too. Yeah. People will forget, and maybe not forget, but at least accept your, you know, ability and what you said, and they will forgive. And I think people ultimately forgive as long as you stay present and available, and you're kind, and you do the best you can. We always have to just do our best.
Kindness is a good spot to leave it at, right?
Yes, it is.
So first step, awareness of yourself and those around you.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Amazing. Ariel, thank you.
No,
I love
no
this
problem.
conversation. Remember, folks, that we have the resources and the contact information for Valeo and a whole host of resources that are available around Northeast Kansas on WIBW.com/hearmesee me. The holidays are a good time to remind ourselves and everyone around us that we do hear you and we do see you.